real stories of werewolves, of dogman from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
The first time I saw him, I wasn't supposed to be awake. It was 3:27 a.m., and I had dragged myself to the kitchen for a glass of water, trying not to wake Marcus. The moonlight painted silver rectangles on my hardwood floor through the French doors leading to the backyard, and that's when I saw the shadow. Not the kind that trees cast on a windy night, but something solid and impossibly large. I froze, water glass halfway to my lips, as my eyes adjusted to make sense of what I was seeing. There, just beyond my garden, stood what I can only describe as a man-shaped thing with a wolf's head. It stood on two legs, easily 8 feet tall, with shoulders broader than my garden gate. Its eyes caught the moonlight and reflected it back like twin amber flames. The creature's fur was thick and dark, rippling in the night breeze like water, and its massive hands ended in claws that could have torn through steel. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That wasn't really the first time anyone saw him. It was just my first time. Marcus had been seeing him for months before that, though I hadn't believed him then. God, I wish I had. Maybe things would have turned out differently. Marcus and I had been so happy when we first moved in together. The house wasn't perfect. The kitchen needed updating. The upstairs bathroom had this persistent drip that no plumber seemed able to fix, and the garden was completely overgrown. But it was ours, or at least it felt like ours. We spent weekends painting walls and planting flowers, making plans for renovations we'd tackle someday. Marcus even built the garden gate himself, this beautiful wooden arch that he stained dark cherry red. The changes in him started so gradually that I almost didn't notice at first. A missed dinner here, a canceled plans there. He started taking longer routes to get anywhere, avoiding the wooded areas near our house. The bags under his eyes grew darker and he jumped at small noises. I found him sleeping on the couch more often than not, claiming he didn't want to disturb my rest with his insomnia. Then came the night I woke up to find him standing at our bedroom window, completely rigid. "There's something out there, Jenna," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. "It's watching us. Watching me." I got up and looked, but all I saw were shadows and trees. "Come back to bed, honey," I said, trying to sound soothing. "You're just overtired." But it kept happening. Night after night, I'd find him at different windows, staring into the darkness. He started sleeping less and less. His work began to suffer. Our relationship, too. Where we used to spend evenings cooking together or watching movies, now he paced the house obsessively, checking locks and peering through curtains. "It's massive, Jenna," he'd say, his voice cracking. "Like a wolf, but wrong. It stands like a man. It watches me. It knows I'm here." I did what any rational girlfriend would do. I suggested therapy, stress management, maybe a vacation. When he started talking about a massive wolf man stalking our property, I really pushed the therapy angle. I even made an appointment for him, but he never went. The night Marcus left, we had our biggest fight ever. He was throwing clothes into a duffel bag, his hands shaking so badly he could barely zip it closed. "That thing, it's not going to let me stay," he said, his voice hollow. "It wants me gone." "There is no thing," I shouted, frustrated tears running down my face. "You need help, Marcus. Please, just let me help you." He turned to me then, and the look in his eyes still haunts me, pure terror mixed with something like pity. "I love you," he said softly, "but I can't stay here and wait for it to decide I'm not leaving fast enough." He was gone before midnight. I later learned from his sister that he'd moved to Arizona, about as far from our Michigan home as he could get while staying in the lower 48. She told me he was doing better there, sleeping again, seeing a therapist. I was relieved, but also angry. 3 years together, and he'd thrown it all away over what I thought were stress-induced hallucinations. For 2 months after that, I lived alone in the house, alternating between guilt and resentment. I redecorated, trying to erase the signs of Marcus's presence. I painted over our carefully chosen colors, replaced our shared belongings with new ones that were just mine. I even considered taking down the garden gate, but something always stopped me. Then I met David at my friend Sarah's birthday party. He was everything Marcus wasn't: practical, grounded, completely normal. He worked as an accountant and spent his weekends doing sensible things like grocery shopping and catching up on paperwork. After 3 dates at restaurants and coffee shops, I finally felt comfortable enough to invite him back to my place. We were on the couch, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about his latest audit. Thrilling, I know, but at least it was real. When David suddenly went rigid beside me. The wine glass slipped from his hand, splashing red across my cream-colored carpet. What is that?" His voice came out as a whisper, but the fear in it made my skin crawl. I followed his gaze to the French doors. There it stood, exactly as Marcus had described it, massive, wolf-headed, eerily human in its posture. It raised one clawed hand and pressed it against the glass, and I swear I could hear the pane creaking under its weight. Its amber eyes fixed on David with an intensity that seemed to crackle in the air. David was out of my house so fast he left his jacket behind. He texted me the next day. "I'm sorry, but I can't. I just can't." He blocked my number after that. The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and constant vigilance. The creature, the dogman, as I started calling it in my head, appeared regularly now. Sometimes at night, sometimes in broad daylight, standing at the edge of my property like some twisted guardian. I'd catch glimpses of it while doing laundry, see its reflection in my kitchen window while washing dishes, spot its shadow moving across my garden while checking the mail. I installed security cameras, but they would mysteriously stop working whenever it appeared. I tried to capture it on my phone, but the photos always came out blurry or completely black. I even set up motion-activated lights, but they either didn't trigger or burned out within days. My life became smaller, more confined. I stopped gardening even though I loved it, because being outside made me feel exposed. I drew the curtains at sunset and double-checked every lock before bed. I stopped having friends over. How could I explain the massive figure that sometimes appeared in my background during video calls, or the deep scratches that would mysteriously appear on my garden gate? Dating became impossible. How could I bring anyone home? "Hey, wanna come over?" Just ignore the 8-foot werewolf that likes to watch through my windows. Yeah, that would go over well. I tried dating apps, but always made excuses to meet elsewhere. Coffee shops became my second home, but eventually, everyone wants to see where you live. But life has a way of surprising you, even when you're living in a horror movie. I met Lester at the Traverse City Farmers Market one sunny Saturday morning. I had forced myself to go out, needing some semblance of normalcy in my life. He was selling honey from his own hives, and something about his calm, steady presence drew me in. "The bees know," he said, after I'd been sampling different varieties of honey for maybe longer than was strictly necessary. When something's wrong in their environment, they know, but they don't panic. They adapt. Something about the way he said it made me look up sharply. He was watching me with kind, knowing eyes, and for a moment, I felt seen in a way I hadn't in months. We started talking about bees, then about gardens, then about everything else. He told me about his grandmother, who had lived in the Upper Peninsula all her life and knew every folk tale and legend the region had to offer. I told him about my abandoned garden, though not why I'd abandoned it. When he asked me out to dinner, I almost said no. Almost. But there was something about Lester that felt safe, like he understood things that others might run from. For weeks, we dated without him ever coming to my house. I made excuses, renovations, plumbing issues, a mess from painting. But Lester was patient, kind, and somehow seemed to sense there was something I wasn't telling him. He never pushed, never demanded, just waited. Finally, after a particularly wonderful evening out, I couldn't come up with another excuse when he offered to walk me to my door. My hands shook as I unlocked it, dreading what might happen. The night was clear, the moon nearly full, and I knew somehow that this was it. Either the end of another potential relationship or something else. We made it all the way inside before I heard Lester's sharp intake of breath. I didn't have to turn around to know what he was seeing through the French doors. "Jenna," he said quietly, "I think you might have a dogman." I started crying then, probably from relief. Not because I was scared, but because finally, someone wasn't running away. Instead, Lester wrapped his arms around me and held me while I told him everything about Marcus, about David, about all the sleepless nights and the constant fear. When I finished, Lester was quiet for a long moment, still holding me. "You know," he said finally, "my grandmother used to tell stories about the Michigan dogman. I always thought they were just stories to keep us kids from wandering into the woods at night, but she said they were protectors in their way, guardians of places and people they deemed important." I looked up at him, then back at the French doors. The dogman was still there, but something was different. Its posture had changed, less menacing, more watchful. In the moonlight, I could see every detail of its face. The way its fur silver-tipped in the glow, the intelligence in those amber eyes. "He's been keeping them away," Lester said softly. "The ones who wouldn't have been good for you?" A week later, Lester helped me pack up my house. He didn't rush me, didn't pressure me to leave everything behind. We took our time, wrapping each item carefully, deciding what to keep and what to let go. As we loaded the last box into his truck, I glanced back at my property. The dogman stood at the edge of the woods, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I could have sworn it nodded at me before melting back into the shadows. Lester and I have been living together for 2 years now, in his cozy farmhouse surrounded by beehives and wildflowers. The Michigan winters are still harsh, but there's something magical about watching snow fall on the hives, knowing the bees are clustered inside, keeping each other warm. Sometimes, on full moon nights, I think I see a familiar silhouette at the edge of our property. But it doesn't frighten me anymore. Marcus called me last month out of the blue. "He's doing better now," he said, but he wanted to apologize for how he left things. I told him there was nothing to forgive. After all, he'd been telling the truth all along. We talked for a while about his life in Arizona, about my life with Lester. Neither of us mentioned the dogman directly, but when he said he was glad I found someone who could handle things, I knew what he meant. These days, I like to think of my dogman as something of a supernatural dating service. Terrifying, sure, but ultimately effective. He knew what I needed before I did, someone who would face the unexplainable by my side rather than run from it. Someone like Lester, who understands that sometimes the monsters aren't really monsters at all, just guardians making sure we end up exactly where we're supposed to be. I still have those French doors in my kitchen, salvaged from my old house. Lester helped me install them. Sometimes, when the moon is full and the night is quiet, I stand before them with a glass of water, remembering that first night I saw him, and I whisper a quiet thank you to the shadow that brought me home. We're thinking of starting a garden together, Lester and I. He says the bees would like more flowers, and I miss having my hands in the soil. We've already picked out the wood for the gate, dark cherry red, just like the old one. Some things, after all, are worth keeping.
It's a classic rollover, play with the scary stories, got it. It's a classic rollover, put it in a stand or go to go. Available in white, black, navy, gray, or pink. Link is in the description.
Thanks, Biggie, and thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.